I've been described as being cold, unfeeling, unemotional, lots of other terms. I have a heart. It hurts. The children are and always will be a huge part of that, the happiness and the hurt. They're both sides.
It's way easier for people to hate and get angry and feed off that anger. And that's what I've learned over the years.
I'm a little scared and worried that it's going to turn around and happen again, and then people are stuck in the same situation.
The story of Kathleen Folbigg is very well known. 22 years ago, she was convicted of killing her 4 infant children and was labelled Australia's most hated woman. For 20 years, she stayed behind bars. And then, 2 years ago, a miracle. She was granted an unconditional pardon, and a few months later, the court quashed her convictions. Today, in an exclusive episode of Something to Talk About, you'll be hearing from Kathleen alongside her best friend and advocate, Tracy Chapman. For decades, Kathleen's grief, her diary entries, and the most private parts of her life were laid bare, judged and condemned. Her voice was silenced. Only a handful of people, those who knew her best, believed otherwise, and Tracy Chapman was one of them. Scientific breakthroughs uncovered the most likely cause of death of Kathleen's children was natural causes, including a rare genetic mutation and other inherited conditions. Kathleen has now been a free woman for 2 years, and during that time she sat down with Tracy and wrote a book. And today we'll hear from them about everything in their new book, Inside Out, for the very first time. Kathleen and Tracy, welcome to the Stellar Podcast.
Thank you.
Your friendship goes back a long way, since kindergarten, in fact, and you have been through so much together. Unimaginable tragedy, loss, time in prison, quest for justice, and then release. Did you ever foresee a day where the two of you would be sitting here about to release a book?
Not at all. Didn't know this direction in life has sort of gone way off where I thought I was heading. So I don't know about Trace. Trace's,
I wouldn't have picked it for sure.
Us writing a book.
I mean, when asked though, I thought it was important because I don't want other people to have to go through this again. And
definitely.
So it was really affirming in that regard. But I don't know. You see it there and you...
Well, it's still,
we did it.
We're still pinching ourselves saying we did it, I said, so yeah.
The book opens on the 5th of June, 2023, Kathleen, the day that you were released from prison. I'm going to just quote a little bit of the book to you because it is such a powerful book. So I'll try to do justice to your respective voices. Kathleen, from you, I've been in prison for 20 years, infamously accused of crime so evil that just about the whole of Australia vilified me, abused me, threatened me, physically and certainly verbally attacked me, and threatened my friends and loved ones. That terrified me and made me constantly worry for their safety, let alone my own. And now I'm heading to a new home, reuniting with friends who work tirelessly with only social justice in their hearts and the belief that I could not have committed those awful crimes. My new family. I'd love to start by asking you about your new family and obviously Tracy, I imagine, front and centre of that family.
Absolutely. I even say that, the Chapman family has become my family. Her son Presley, absolutely adore. And I mention in the book how I never actually saw him grow up in person. He grew up via letter or a mention or a little video screenshot of some sort, pictures that Tracy sent me of him growing up. So for him to refer to me as saying, hey, Auntie Kath, as soon as I got there, that was, highly emotional. And yes, it was brilliant. And my family, what I call family now, is fully extended. There are so many people in it now compared to my direct family that I used to have. Yeah.
Tracy, friendships that have survived as long as your friendship has are tested by sometimes the most trivial of things. What do you think has been the thread that has kept this friendship together through what you have respectively experienced?
Honesty.
Absolutely. There's nothing that we can't tell each other.
Even when it upsets
and
you.
even when it upsets us, and we can have some good old balmy arguments about stuff. And I think that works because it's literally opposites attract with Trace and I. We're totally opposite styles of people, as you can tell if you're looking at us how we're dressed. Right down to personality types, and some character traits. But at the core, I think it's we both can find humour in exactly the same thing. And the fact that we are honest and true with each other. So that's how we managed to get through, I think. Many a phone call had where she's saying truthful things to me that I didn't like, and many a phone call had where I might have said something to her she didn't like. I said, so, it worked in the end. So.
I think it's important, though. That's what I like, the transparency. Sometimes it's hard to say really hard things, but you just, especially over the length of time we've operated together, I've often, how many times have I said, I know you're not going to like this, whether it's about a legal matter or it's, stuff that's going on in terms of personal stuff, because it's, it's a complicated relationship. There's so many layers there. You have to have those conversations. It doesn't, if you really respect that relationship. And that's how I think, because we hadn't talked for like 10 years plus for a very long time initially, and then made contact not long after Kath was incarcerated, and that had to evolve again. But we found that pretty quickly we both knew that we knew each other, and that didn't matter how much time had passed. And and it's it's important to laugh.
Have you had a lot of reason to laugh in the course of the time that you have been reunited? Because I imagine there have been moments of levity, hopefully.
Absolutely, because Tracy can say something to me about maybe I've said something or the way I say it, and she repeats it back to me, and then that's the end of us. We're in giggles, just certain things about Tracy will make me smile, and which ends up me laughing. I said, so I like you and take today. Sort of thing. Like, we've been together today doing makeup shoots and whatever else, and we did nothing but laugh, which was causing a bit of a problem because they were trying to take some photographs. I said, so I like to find humour in every day in something. I said, you can't go through life, I don't think, being just pessimistic and not enjoying life or a moment that you have. So,
and I'm really in my head a lot. So I find Cass my balance, you make me laugh about stuff that I probably wouldn't laugh about normally. So it's a good thing. I always say, we're yin to each other's yang, you know what I mean? It's just,
But the backdrop, of course, of your friendship is very, very unique. Kathleen, in the book, you describe the trial as a, quote, witch hunt based on circumstantial evidence. Betrayed by those I trusted, I had my entire life taken away. It's a big question, but in terms of how many people from your life you lost, that disappeared, how many people did stick by you, and how unique was Tracy's role in that, the way that she has stood by you?
What I found was the people that I thought or believed would stick by me didn't, and that was the devastating side of it. Yet the people that I didn't think would really actually stay the course ended up doing so. Now, because, yes, I agree, Tracy's absolutely unique. I said kilometres and kilometres apart, going through her own things that she was going through at that particular time, and yet she had no hesitation in deciding to stick by my side on my back. So yes, extremely rare, and she's exceptional in that manner. People always joke saying, where can we find a Tracy? And I always say, I'm sorry, you can't. I've got the only one and you're not having her. As upsetting as it was, to have, I had family members that just decided to go flip a switch and be on the other side, which was incredibly upsetting. I had friends that I thought I was extremely close to who just decided, oh no, mud sticks, we don't really want to do or have anything to do with this. So to have Tracy step forward and a couple of other, very close friends at the core, all of which we grew up all together. We all went to high school together, and I think that was the base of the connection. I knew them, they knew me, and to form the friendship on a strong base like that, it helped. Yeah.
Tracy, why did you withstand the awful things that have been said about you and that pressure that Kathleen's talking about, and the fact that family, loved ones did walk away? What was it about Kathleen, about yourself, that you stuck by her?
I guess I felt what she was going through, and especially when at childbirth, I had a train wreck of a childbirth and nearly lost my son and nearly lost myself. But I guess in that moment there was real empathy there. This person, how she would have felt, losing 4 children, and I knew, there were so many things that I was reading in the papers and stuff that were just infuriating, like the journaling and stuff we all knew. So there was just, I suppose, the little things and that became big things because they mattered to so many people in a way that meant that she wouldn't be surrounded by the family members that she had. But for us, we knew that person and we knew it couldn't be right. And, we just had to reach out and did.
That empathy that you talk about, Kathleen, the book opens with a dedication to your children. It reads, "To my children, Caleb, Patrick, Sarah and Laura." I'd love to ask you about how you feel this book might honour them and how they continue to live on in your heart, and how their presence sits in the day-to-day with you.
I wrote the dedication like that because as far as I was concerned, each one of them had their own health issues and trials that they seem to be going through, especially Patrick. Patrick to me is just a little warrior. And for them, I do feel, as I wrote, that that the limited days that they had on the earth, they gave all and lived as much as they could. I wanted to write and dedicate that like that because I wanted, I think spiritually, if that's the word, to let them know that I'm doing the same. That, your mum hasn't given up. She's still here. Writing the book also was a way for me to pretty much say, it's hard to explain, but more along the lines of, it's okay, you don't have to watch over me anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm doing okay. And we will meet again at some point one day. So that dedication was written like that for that purpose. Yeah. And I wanted other people to sort of know that, I've been described as being cold, unfeeling, unemotional, lots of other terms. And I guess I wanted people at the very onset of that book to realise that that, I have a heart, that, it hurts. And the children are and always will be a huge part of that. The happiness and the hurt, that they're both sides, I think so, yeah.
Tracy, what about for you, as you talked about, it was that experience of childbirth, your experience that really put some of this or gave you some empathy and that personal insight. Do the memories of Kathleen's 4 babies, how do they live in your heart, and how do you, if at all, I suppose, include them in the way that you've spoken about your shared family, that Kathleen is now her family?
I was really only around with Caleb. Patrick and Sarah with my family. We had updates and stuff because I think my sister was in the hospital when you gave birth to Sarah. So Mum and Dad sent a present to you in the So there was. I kind of lived through my family with Cal because I'd moved away. And I didn't know Laura at all, really. But, I mean, I knew in my heart that Kath loved her children because of the love that had been talked about with my family. So, yeah, I guess from my perspective, I didn't have to know the children to know that she cared. I don't know if that makes sense, but...
It absolutely. Kathleen, with everything that you've been through and then being in prison, losing that 20 years and now being out for 2 years since the wrongful conviction was overturned and you've been pardoned, have you had access to the resources and the therapy and the counselling, if you want it, that you really would have been entitled to in a fair world from day one, a mother grieving the death of not just one child, but 4? Is that something that you've been able to work through with some professional help?
Yes, yeah, and there was no question as to me chasing that down. You give me 25, 26 years ago, I would have said, not a chance, don't need any of that. But of course, in the last 2 years, as soon as I stepped outside, there was no question about it. There was mental health care whilst inside as well, but it's a different type of care. It's a coping, how are you coping sort of situation. When it comes to grief and loss and how you handle that, there was a delay. You could say it's a 20 years pause and delay on me being able to speak about that with anyone professional or get any advice or guidance in respect to how do I move on with that and keep coping day to day with that. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll be forever probably going to some sort of, mental health practitioner, from everything that's happened. Yeah.
I wondered about it when I was reading the book as well, because I imagine in the last 2 years since you've been out from prison that some of that grief has come in a new sort of wave or manifested itself differently now that you're not in that day-to-day of prison life. Would that be accurate?
I've always kept my grief when it comes to the children more of a private thing. Grief's such a hard term to try to explain because everybody does it absolutely differently, and that's the key point. The problem that we had with my trial was people telling me that I was supposed to be grieving a certain way, and in the inquiries as well. There is no cure-all message, for that. It goes on forever, and I tell people that it is forever. Don't ever think it's not. Time, I always say time lessens it, maybe lessens the severity of it, but it's always there. I said, so, I prefer to have things like good memory things pop into my head, and I would rather be thinking about those than dwelling on the grief side that I lost them. That's just a fact. You can't get away from that. I said so.
One of the loveliest memories I have is one of Kath's friends who, the latter part of when you were at Singleton, bringing that box of photos that she had and that first night. That was pretty emotional. Like there was this amazing moment where these photos that Kath hadn't seen for a very long time were coming out, and there was real joy in those memories, I thought.
It was a treasure trove, basically. It was like a couple of those photos are probably actually even in that book that I hadn't seen, myself for such a long time. I'd actually thought I'd lost them all because, when your possessions start to disappear, you're not sure where they've all ended up. And to find that my good friend had actually stored them underneath her house the whole time was quite
remarkable.
Rocked up with them and off we went. We all dove into that box, didn't we?
We were there hours.
Yeah.
But it was so joyful because if you think about it in terms of grief, then there is sadness in the loss, but this wasn't that moment. It was actually bringing out this treasure trove of memories. Yeah. And there was delight. There wasn't pain, really, was there? No,
I don't. I'm not sure whether a lot of people sort of realise, but, Caleb would be 34, 35. It's a long time ago. And I have sort of thought about it and sort of thought if there's one that I did not get to grieve properly for, it would be Laura, because after she died, my whole life went pear-shaped. I said, so, but what does that grief, what does that look like? What what do I do with that? Then that's an ongoing thing. I'm still trying to figure that one out. So.
One of the parts of the trial that you both write about quite a lot in the book, of course, is the diaries. And Kathleen, of course, these became a huge part of the trial. You say in the book how you use them to cope with the uncomfortable thoughts in your head, questions around maternal grief, being a good mother, constantly worrying. Again, I'm just going to quote a little bit from the book where you're talking about when Laura was asleep. This was the most harrowing time for me. The thought that she might not wake up one day never left. To get these uncomfortable thoughts out of my head, I wrote them in journals, dumping bad things I might have to say about others in my life. The hurt would just remain on the page, quiet and private.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it did not.
No.
As we know, your ex-husband, Craig, handed them over to police and they were very much used against you by the prosecution. There's a lot that is brought up in that. The fact that you were denied an opportunity to unpack things, the most personal thoughts in private. How did it feel during the trial to have those most private, innermost thoughts spoken out loud in one, and then secondly, in the most terrible of ways, literally being used to mount a case and prosecute a case against you?
Look, for me, I went through stages of emotions in regards to that. The first was disbelief, really, especially that the ex handed them over, because I was sort of like, wow, okay, what do you do with that? And then the second was probably a fair bit of anger, really, that words that I'm writing could be just plucked out of context and used in such a fashion. Once they did that and started plucking and started almost like they were narrating it themselves and putting it together, whoever was reading it and deciding that's what it meant and this is what you're saying, it didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter how I wanted to explain it. It didn't matter, if there was an excuse for writing those things. It was all deemed to be some villainous act of some sort, and something that an evil person would do. Why would you write these things down like that? And even at the first inquiry, when I did finally come out from underneath the covers to explain it all, I was basically attacked for doing so, and told, no, that's not what you meant.
You were actually attacked.
Yeah, I was actually attacked. I said, so to have, people stand there saying, this is what you meant, this is what you were actually saying when you said that, and you're sitting there going, well, actually, no, I'm telling you that this is what so it goes, disbelief and anger. Quite a bit of shock. And then, of course, I had to have acceptance then. Okay, my inner thoughts are all out there for everybody now. I said, so I have to accept that they are. And I had to go through the process also of, not over-explaining, and just pretty much people would say at me, oh, you wrote this means this. And I'd have to just look at them and go your hardest if that's what you think, okay. That I can't argue. I'm not going to argue with you about it because I know you don't. So it's quite a lot of different stages to go through when someone does that. But the bottom line is, as far as I'm concerned, I think we all agree, those sorts of things like journals and personal things like that should not be used, because they're too open to, interpretation. And
it's unfair. It's a sacred thing. It's a sacred thing. You just don't do that to someone. It's supposed to be a safe thing to do, and you rip it open. And I mean, even some of the things you'd written about, friends and stuff, I was just horrified because I thought you should be allowed to have your inner thoughts kept private, I was mortified for her.
It's something that people are encouraged to do as well in therapy and process it. We hear a lot in the culture now about journaling and the importance of it, and yet knowing that it could be violated and a person could be betrayed in the most heinous of ways. Kathleen, was it something that were you able to work through that part of the betrayal? I mean, for instance, would you ever journal again?
Absolutely not.
No.
Don't even, you can't even get that question out.
Yeah.
I've had psychologists and all that say to me, you really should start doing that again. And I'd be like, not on my life am I writing anything else down again. And then I go and write a book. So what do you do? But it's I would never write as in having a journal at the bedside table and writing my personal thoughts down again. No. So the anger bit of it was that was stolen from me. And I will never be secure enough in myself to even attempt to ever do it again. Some experts have said, well, you could do it, write on a bit of page, rip it up and be done. And then I'm like, I wouldn't trust that someone wouldn't find those pages, put them back together and do something.
That was what happened in
that's
prison.
What happened whilst I was inside once. I said, so, unfortunately, I had to learn how to speak. Instead of keeping it all inside and just sort of going, I'm going to write that down and that empties that and I can get rid of it. I've now had to actually learn to, ring up someone like Tracy and say, oh, I'm thinking about this. This is terrible. What am I thinking? And then she sort of either slapped me in the face with a wet fish or says, okay, let's talk about this. I said, so it's been a huge learning curve for me to actually open up and speak. Which is really
sad because I was a complete smartass when she first got out of prison. Do you remember on your bedside table? I'm so rebellious. I actually bought her this gorgeous purple because
I still got
purple,
it. It's empty.
And it's got gold and everything all over it and it's a journal and I had a pen sitting there on her bedside table waiting for her.
Did not go down well. No, we know it's never been open.
As I said, I still have it. It's on my bookshelf, totally empty with nothing in it. So.
Yeah. It's sad because, if I can just add to that for a second, because there's so many people over the years that have come to me and asked me what they should do with their journals and that everything that happened with Kath had actually traumatized quite a lot of people. Like, I'm not talking just one or two here. I'm talking dozens and dozens and dozens, mostly women, but, terrified what might happen and then tell me that, they've done X, Y, Z or they've said X, Y, Z and that they're worried. What should they do? And I just said, well, it's up to you what you do with it. Burn them, don't burn them, hide them away somewhere, whatever. But I just thought to even get to this, to have these conversations, that's disgraceful.
It's a travesty, isn't it? Because it's that violation. It's like when there'll be a case where somebody has gone and spoken to a psychologist and there's all these trust in place and then that will be broken and not through proper channels because obviously there are circumstances where things that confidence is breached, but outside of that. And how does that trust ever be regained?
Well, in my respect, it never will, never was. I've never.
Very sad, really.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the impact of those diaries being used against you was so damning. Obviously, had a direct correlation with the conviction before it was mercifully overturned into 2023. Tracy, for you, during that time, I imagine that was the thing that people most pushed you on in terms of you standing by Kathleen.
Absolutely.
How did you handle that? What would you say to people? And if I can ask, were there times where you then ever questioned Kathleen's innocence yourself?
Not question innocence, but needed to understand why. So there's a couple of letters that have been put out there in the media in terms of these hard conversations that I did, didn't I? I asked the hard questions because I was asked it so often that I just had to, and that's just my way. As we said, it's fair, right, and transparent to do so. But everything Kath replied in those letters actually made complete sense. So, and, even though people said, oh, well, this is in hindsight and there was so many blowbacks on that sort of stuff, it was actually quite frustrating at times. You get to a point where you just kind of go, well, go back and look at what journaling is in context and you'll find out that actually makes sense. And, the prosecution had done such a hatchet job on this, in terms of they had put such a good argument well, to me it wasn't a good argument because they didn't do the right thing in the first place with what mental health journaling is and put it in context and all of that. But they had such a strong narrative that it was very difficult to have that cut through, especially in those early days.
During that part of proceedings, was there any hope for either of you? I'll ask you separately. Kathleen, I'll start with you. Did you ever think when, at the worst of it, that is being weaponised, prosecution, as Tracy says, of running a very effective narrative, did you ever think, okay, I'll be able to set the record straight one day? There will be a day where I come back from this.
Not for me. I think by, having to sit through the trial, watching the prosecution do its dance, so to speak, I very quickly started watching jury and watching people around me, and I just shook my head and went, this isn't going to go well. So it was a very early, I'm in trouble here, this isn't going well. As for... no, I would have to say it wasn't really until Tracy and all the team and all the people that supported her and everyone that supported me, when we all got together and decided, no, we might have to fight this, I said, and we're going to have to go in harder, that I started to think, one day I can possibly step out, have something to say and do whatever. But early on, I've always had the thought of, heaven help anybody else who gets stuck and goes through this process, because they're going to end up exactly the same. So the book in particular for me is about sending that message out that an ordinary Australian can get themselves into an awful pickle. And, we're hoping that the book sort of sends out the message that don't think it can't happen to you, because it just might. And this is what you're going to face if it does. And we don't want that.
No.
Both of us, the message is strong. We don't want this to ever happen to anyone else again.
The message in the book is very clear to that. And also, I think in terms of the comfort that people take, because people tell their stories when they see something unfathomably awful happening to somebody. Well, these are the reasons that will never happen to me, because of this and that. And they're stories that we all tell ourselves to protect ourselves, because then you have to contemplate the reality. Well, actually, that could be me, could be somebody that I know, somebody that I love.
So easily.
Yeah.
The gender aspect of it as well, I think, dovetails. There's many times throughout the book where you're both documenting things that happened during the trial, even what we've just talked about with the diaries. And we've seen this in infamous other Australian cases, other than yours, Kathleen, of course, Lindy Chamberlain being the most other well-known case, but internationally as well, even in a situation like with Madeleine McCann's parents, and the way that the behaviour and what you were talking about earlier, Kathleen, like the not reacting the quote-unquote right way, that's something that comes through very clearly in the book. The misogyny of the system, of the culture, family politics. Can I ask you about that, Kathleen? Is that something, do you think the progress that we've made hopefully was one of the factors that led to your case being reconsidered? But also, I'm going to guess you're thinking, well, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Like, that was going to be my answer. I was going to say it's a shame 25 years has passed, and at times I blink and go, have we actually learnt anything here? But I'd have to say that the male support in regards to our team and everything else that, everyone that we've been in contact with over all these years, so the misogyny, when people say misogyny, it sounds like it's all, women
everywhere.
against men. I said, we sort of don't agree with the word misogyny, do we? Because it's
not
it's
in the
labeling
context
all men.
of general life.
Yeah, not in general.
In your case.
In my case, yes. To have a prosecutor dancing around and just sort of, saying it was all an evil thing to be doing, and it just made it sound like, it was almost targeting simply because I was a woman. So way back then. Have we had improvement? I'd like to think we have. I'm not going to say, that we haven't. So, yeah.
It's true. I think it is that sort of systemic misogyny. As you say, it's not necessarily about, all the men are against the women. It's nothing like that. It's just part of the patriarchy that we're all continuing to live in and that was a lot more unquestioned 20 years ago. Tracy, what are your observations of this throughout the time? Do you think that people sitting in the courtroom observing authorities that would have been different
even
if she was a man?
Even everyday people that I would talk to, because I set upon early on asking people, trying to understand how we got here and having these conversations with people. But, I mean, I was absolutely gobsmacked at when you were hearing, because we're in a different tech world now, but back then you were reading the good old newspapers and watching the 7 o'clock news. Well, I was. And, just the reporting of it, like the girls from the gym, I'll never forget that term. I just went, what? But apart from that, it was more even just saying, well, she was the carer. Well, yeah, duh. She was the primary carer while the husband was out working. So, of course, Kath's the one that's at home and, and he's sleeping and snoring because we all knew he had sleep apnea issues and a bomb would go off and he wouldn't hear anything. So there were certain things like that just were absolutely infuriating. And then the media jumps on board with the narrative because they can smell the blood. So then you've got this horrible situation. And I've really been very critical of just the average human does not critically think things through. And so they'll believe what they hear and just be enraged, but extrapolate that out and just think, well, duh, she was the one at home. He was off working. And I'll never forget some of the comments Craig used to make about who you were and what, how unfit you were after having babies and all the stress of losing children and stuff, that he wants you to be this svelte woman, but you can't have that and go to the gym. Then you weaponize for going to the gym. Like, what the hell? What sort of society are we in?
Absolutely.
I do think one of the major things that was attacked was mothering. And I'm like, and every mother does it differently. There's not one single household that we're mothering the same as the person next door. They all do it, so different. To have that attacked and just sort of say, you were doing it wrong, it's incorrect, it should have been done this way. At times, I'd be sitting there looking at Tracy going, what are we living in the 1940s? What's going on here?
Shocking.
Yeah, so it wasn't back then that was just seemed to be a standard way of thinking. It's not so much like that now, so it's more acceptable that women work and do things at the same time. But at the same time, there's a far higher bar for being a mother than I think there is for being a father. It's just how it goes. It's always going to be like that, I think.
And I was shocked. So. I remember, can't remember if I even wrote it in the book, but in the first inquiry, on the days you were on the stand, I think it was the last day, and it was put up your calendars. And I just remember sitting there with tears running down my face because I was thinking in that moment, she's been vilified for her mothering, and yet her standards were way higher than mine. Like, there was no way I'd have written, Caleb had 60 mils of milk and did this and did that, and then meticulously list all of the things that you're doing before you go to the doctors. I would never do that. And I just thought, what are we doing here? There's an incongruence here. And I just remember in that moment feeling really sick and sad for the lack of humanity. And then the findings, of course, from the first inquiry just cemented that even more. But, in that moment, I just thought, you're a bloody good mother. And how dare they? Do you know what I mean?
I really do. I think, if we judge anyone more harshly than a woman, see a aforementioned conversation about sexism and systemic misogyny, it's a mother. I would argue very few identities in this world are more scrutinised and held to account fair enough held to account, all of us, but unfairly, exactly what you're talking about, Tracy, than a mother. And Kathleen, you are and were both. You're a woman and a mother. So I was going to say tick, tick, but X, apparently.
Yes.
Yeah, it became a weapon in the end. It was shocking.
Craig's name has come up a couple of times, your ex, who actually passed away last year. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the things that you write about in the book. You talk about, now just to recap in the book, this is touched upon, you got married in 1987. You were only 17 and then were divorced in 2000.
No, that's actually incorrect.
Is that, sorry, is that incorrect?
I was
okay.
actually 20.
Oh, you were 20. Okay, sorry.
20.
All right. Okay. I'll say that again. All right. Kathleen, you were married in 1987. You were only 20, so very young, and then got divorced after you were wrongfully convicted. In the book, you reveal for the first time that you actually left Craig on different occasions because of his philandering, only to later return. You write, one suggestion he made was that I should become his mistress and his mistress become the wife. An idea that got him thrown out of the flat I was living in, and that's when things turned nasty on his side. When I read it, jaw meet floor, I imagine anyone reading it would have a similar reaction. Where to even begin with unpacking this? Is that something that you're obviously furious about at the time? But again, with the hindsight of the fact that you've realised increasingly, luckily society has told us you don't have to put up with that. You've grown older because 20 is very, very young. How do you process that as you write in the book?
For me, I think it was, we've had many conversations about even why my marriage lasted as long as it did, really. And it's because back then I was also brought up with parents that stayed together, hell or high water. I said, so I had a very similar attitude that if you're going to get married, then the ring means something, and that you get through anything. Now, yes, I did leave, I think 4 times, and some of it was due to his reaction. His grief reaction was not sustainable, and I was having trouble getting him back. I said, so there's 1 or 2 times where I've left him to get him to snap his eyes open and go, okay, I need to come back. The last couple of times, and less especially the last time, was literally because suggestions put to me over all of the years that we were married that his eyes weren't always on me, were ignored because I was thinking, oh, well, he's married to me, he'll come back. I said, so it was a very head in the sand ostrich type situation for a long, long time. So it wasn't really till the last one, that particular bit, where he just sort of like, we were separated, living in a flat, and he comes to the flat and pretty much suggests that I become the mistress and the mistress become the wife because he'd be happier that way. Well, that was like, okay, now that's a wet fish in the face. And I was strong enough by then to say, absolutely not, no, get out. I think that's where I found a bit of my own self-respect because I think I was lacking it. I was very insecure, very young when we met. He became my world, so controlled everything. And even though it used to seem like I was very confident in how I behaved and walked around and what I was doing, he wasn't there, not really. So, and anyone who was around me at the time used to, see that when Craig and I were together, I wasn't as confident and wasn't as secure as I probably should have been. But that particular episode, which I put that in as an antidote, basically, to sort of have a bit of a giggle, going, good Lord, sort of what man was this, and my reaction to it. Yes, the serious side of it is by doing that with him, that's when it turned, and that's when it became nasty, and that's when it became, okay, if you don't, how I saw it anyway, other people would probably say differently, but I saw it as, okay, you don't want to play ball with me, then this is how the game's going to go. So, yeah, that was the downside to me finally getting a backbone and saying enough's enough. Yeah.
But do you have any regrets about that? You had gained that self-respect, you know, had some boundaries, were realising what you were worth. And then, that obviously, as a lot of women
I'd have to say no. Like, of course, at insecure moments, I'd be teetering on the edge, you know, sort of saying, well, trying to give him excuses for the behaviour. I was still doing it even 12 months into my sentence, giving him excuses as to why he was behaving. And people would say to me, snap out of it, Kath. And I said, you know, he's the bad guy here, not you, you know. So it would be, many a time where I would be doubting myself. But no regrets that I finally did do it. I also didn't, but what I didn't wish was for, because we had lost our 4 children, he was the father of my children and we'd been through so much, in optimistic fantasy land, I guess, in an ideal world, thought that we could have remained friends at least and managed to, and I would have wished him well and off you go, and he could have wished me well and off I went. But it wasn't working out that way. So
that betrayal of handing the diaries over to the police, how was that something that you ever contemplated forgiving him for? Did you ever make peace with that? When he passed away last year, can I ask what the status of your relationship with him was?
There hadn't been a relationship. You know, when he passed away, he'd well and truly moved on. I'd moved on. And there was no relationship. There was, you know, what questions asked, like, well, if you got out, Kath, and you ran into him in the street, what would you do? I'd be like, probably have to walk across the other side of the street and get away from him as fast as possible. And that's not because I was worrying about his reaction. You know, so the handing over of the diaries was, I don't think I actually fully understood what he did and why until it was too late. You know, did he get a reprimand at the time for doing it? He certainly did. Pretty much, you know, I think I'm even on recording tapes saying, you know, what are you doing? What did you do that for? Why would you do that? You know, so questioning him. But, you know, when you're not getting any answers that are truthful, you're not sure what to do with it. And of course, once he'd done it. I couldn't do anything about it. It was out there and done, you know. So
yeah, you can't take that
can't take them back. So, yeah.
Tracy, what about for you as somebody I can see, and in the book, obviously, there was frustration that you felt for Kathleen at multiple times back then with the philandering, that nonsensical suggestion from him about the mistress swap. And then, of course, the really awful betrayal of handing in the diaries. How do you feel about when I mention Craig's name? How do you feel? What does the mention of his name bring up for you?
Look, there's been so many times where I've tried to talk to Craig. I mean, there's one memorable moment that was caught on camera and people still to this day scratch their head about it. But I always try to find empathy and compassion first and understanding, because that to me is the only way to move forward as far as I'm concerned. So I remember reaching out to him with the first inquiry, wanting to talk to him. I gave a card over, and then, for reasons I can't explain, it became not hostile on his part. It wasn't that. It was more he just wanted things to stop. He needed it to stop. And, you know, we actually gave each other a hug in that moment. And that was a genuine hug from me. Other people saw it differently, and it became something quite hostile, which was very sad at the end of that. But for me, I try to understand. I don't understand. I mean, there's so many things I don't understand. When I've read transcripts and stuff, I just don't understand. I think there was a lot of emotional immaturity, but again, we've never talked about that. So, yeah, I mean, I look back and go, I wouldn't have married that. I did say that many times, didn't I? But you know, Kath loved him. And like I said in the book, you know, I wasn't going to rain on her parade. I saw how much she loved him. I saw the look every time she looked at him. You know, she did. She was, and all you want for a friend is to be happy, right? And so what you think does not really matter. that's that.
Something else that you write about in the book that came up in the trial was, Kathleen, the fact that your father had gone to prison for murdering your mother when you were just 2 years old. And again, this was something that was brought up in the trial, like the diaries, out of context, weaponized against you. In fact, you know, there were jurors that were told not to research and were going and finding out. So you then were dealing with the frustration of knowing that people knew that and were making their own vigilante, amateur, sleuth assumptions and conclusions, and yet it wasn't something that was able to be corrected. Again, how did that feel? You've already have this incredibly complicated part of your origin story, and then to have that brought up by detectives as well, making assumptions about your character.
Well, for me, when it came to, you know, knowledge about my biological parents, I was very, very quick, I think, to dismiss them because they had nothing to do with my life. They didn't bring me up. They're not part of my core values.
And
there was no, and I didn't find out till I was nearly older anyway.
Yeah.
But at the trial time, to have that, and when they were specifically instructed not to go find things out, like the prosecution actually tried to get that across as an evidence, and the judge had shut it down and said, no, that's going to lead to bias. You can't do that. So for the jury to find out about it anyway was like, oh, here we go. I said, but what I thought was stupid was, just because my father did that, it seemed to be a link to say, oh, I must genetically be you know, I must be going to go and do the same thing, and I must be capable of doing the same thing, which was such a ridiculous notion.
It was actually offensive.
Yes, it was. But unfortunately, you know, once again, it was a case of once it was out there and weaponized, there was no chance to undo it without it making sound like we were just offering major excuses for something. So once it was done and dusted, you know, yes, I mentioned finding out a bit of history about him. And I've always described him as being totally irrelevant to me. You know, we even have made jokes in the past that if I'd actually been raised with him, I could have been a queen brothel owner in Sydney, working in the underbelly. You know, I said, so it's all just laughable to me that you would even make the connection that I could be his daughter in such a obscene manner. You know, so what do you do with that? For me, you make jokes about it because that's what I do.
Yeah.
Let's touch upon the parts of the book where you talk about being in prison. And Kathleen, you write that you were a frequent target of violence from other inmates because, quote, what is worse than a child killer other than a pedophile? Not much. How do you begin to get out of bed on top of everything else, wearing that judgment and that label from your fellow inmates?
I think for me, because ever since the age of 3, I've had a stubborn streak that sticks the feet in the sand and just sort of says, oh, no, you don't, not having a bar of that. That helped, you know, of course, you know, I understand those who want to just get under the covers and never come out ever again. I have empathy and can understand those who go down such a bad mental health route that they're almost not savable because it does affect them in such a manner that it's just atrocious. For me, it was, I think I just woke up every day going, okay, I'm staring at this cement wall and ceiling. I guess I have to get up and do something. So it was a very on-purpose decision-making. I had to do it every day. There were times when it was a struggle and times when, you know, psychologists would be a little concerned that I'm not coping because I would maybe slide a bit in behaviour. When it came to, you know, I would get a little argumentative and start to be a little resistant, but then soon have to go, I can't keep doing that. I said, you know, I had to keep saying to myself, it's a free country. Everyone can have any opinion they like. You know, I said, same as I can. So some of the arguments I used to have or verbals I used to have, that was exactly the line that I used to say. I used to say, you're entitled to your opinion and you can state that if you like. Do you wish me to have the opinion that I have of you and do you want me to say it? So it would make them stop and go, maybe not. So I soon learned how to talk my way out of any the troubles or issue that I was having. Of course, the book touches on a couple of times when I didn't manage to talk my way out of things. But I've always been, as Tracy can contest, even in public school, bullies were a no-go as far as I was concerned. Bully behaviour was a no-go. I was a little bit stronger in being able to stand there even at the age of 4 or 5 and say, don't bully me, and start, sort of thing, and do it for other people as well, which is sort of almost how we met. Tracy was being bullied in public school, and I went, oh, yeah, no, you don't. We connected that way. So I drew on that. That's what I drew on every day that I was inside, and stuck to that core value of me that was like, I will give you the respect that you deserve, just give it back. And it does. I soon learnt to say, it doesn't matter what I'm in here for. We're all wearing exactly the same dark bottle green tracksuit. What are you trying to prove here? I said, so that's how I dealt with it. Of course, then Tracy was going through her own stuff on the outside in versions of that.
Absolutely. But, I mean, even with Kath writing, it brought her humanity to the fore. Like, the letters that, she often asked me, like, why did I keep them? But I always thought it was the truth. And I don't even remember when I first started saying this is not your story, but it's not your story because I didn't believe it. So, those letters too, you would say, getting into the routine of writing to me or to any of the others that we talked to, was to restore your humanity and keep your dignity and, not let it be your story.
Because, Tracy, you also write very powerfully in the book about, as Kathleen said, you were dealing with your own bullies and inquisitors. You write, I set a straightforward goal to discuss Kath's case with 5 strangers daily, whether queuing at the supermarket or sitting in a waiting room somewhere. I seized every opportunity to discuss her plight. The reactions I received were often uncharitable, hostile. It's a really vivid description. I think I'm sure people reading it will be like me and watching you doing that, Tracy.
She would even come to visit me in correctional centres and do it in the waiting room. And then you would have correctional officers saying, excuse me, Miss Chapman, you can't be doing that. So, yes.
Oh, that happened. Yeah,
Clarence,
I do.
yes.
Clarence, yes. Yeah.
What sort of responses did you get? I mean, I imagine that you presumably encountered the entire spectrum of responses.
Yeah.
And did you see those responses shift in time over that 20 years when the narrative started to shift a little?
Absolutely, but it took a really long time. Yeah, it really took a long time, and that was very sad because the media, I always say, the media really didn't help us in that regard at all, and no offense.
Fair.
But you get a 5-second grab on a story. Do they want to hear the underdog? No. Our story is not that palatable to them. It's much more salacious if there's other. And I think that's what I've realised too. It's way easier for people to hate and get angry and feed off that anger. And that's what I've learned over the years. Like, you've actually done me a favour, just learning to fight the good fight, hold on to the values that I care about, and know that it's really important to tell the truth about, the situations that I found Kath in, and that's why I asked so many questions, as you know.
Painful.
And then I would always find talking points to go off on. It was just, and I got better at it.
But it's so true. And I mean, the prevalence of social media, which is something that didn't really exist before you went into prison, Kathleen, I mean, that we see that people, it's easier to spread hatred and judgment and misinformation. How was that effect on the people in your life and your family when you're having those conversations? I mean, did you have family members say, look, I'm not going to go to the supermarket with you because I don't want to be, talking to people about Kathleen and her case?
I mean, I even had to convince family members of why I was doing what I was doing because they believed the narrative. And it took a long time to swing people around, even in my own family. I mean, it's a sad reality, but that's the truth of it. So, I mean, there would be people that didn't want to hang with me. I get that. Not so much in the early days. You could fly under the radar and just be annoying in the supermarket and stuff and get away with it. Presley was the one that suffered the most on that part. but later on, it was interesting. You could write a book in that alone, actually, because it's so interesting. But the social media, it was a whole new animal, and not in a good way.
Kathleen, the other side of prison, though, that you talk about is the friendships and the solidarity. You write about how, when survival is at stake, I think most of us would do anything to go forward. I kept me as true as I could. I made friends, and a few true friends. And you talk about thanks goes to the few friends I made during my life inside. Are you still in touch with some of the friends that you made?
I'm still in touch with every one of them. Yeah, I could count on one hand how many there are, and I was extremely selective about who I let in as a friend, because you have to be. I describe it, I think, that you just make friendlies or friendly acquaintances when you're inside. But occasionally over those 20 years, I came across someone that I found to be in the same plight as me, and sort of just having to do their time and get back out. And they came from a walk of life that I associated with. They were hardworking. Marriages had flopped, failed, and whatever else. They raised the children. And they were solid people. I said, so those people I'm still in contact with today. So hello to all of you who's listening.
And a few of them even become sort of friends, our friends as well, because they were, really good people that you just realise were in really awful situations. And it cements even more for me that, these were women caught up in the same sort of situations and pretty voiceless, and, especially in the system that we found ourselves in, a lot of males prosecuting and all of that sort of stuff that didn't understand. Those women, when you talk to them, they've got the cases are different, but the stories are pretty similar. And your heart goes out to them.
Yes.
Well, the advocacy that is so evident at the core of Inside Out is obviously primarily informed by, Kathleen, your story, and Tracy, you being there as an ally through this story, but clearly what you have witnessed and the people and the other women in particular that you have encountered along the way. That advocacy, Tracy, definitely came at a cost. We touched upon a little bit of the cost for your immediate circle and family, but also a financial cost. And in the book you write, as uncomfortable as it is to say out loud, I need to tell the truth. This advocacy has taken a heavy financial and personal toll on me, more than even figures lost, income not earned, missed opportunities with no superannuation for support. I mean, this concept of the financial toll that it has taken over 20 years. Again, I know I've asked you, were there times where you questioned it? People in your life must have questioned it. And how do we fix this, that standing by someone advocating for what you believe to be true, ultimately being successful, does not come at such a huge cost at every single conceivable level?
Well, I call it augmented injustice, because Kath was at the centre and it rippled out and it impacted many lives. And I always say I'm a we, not a me. That's why I say uncomfortably, I have to talk about this. How do we fix this? Well, we have to have a trauma-informed. You cannot have reform, systemic reform, unless we look at governance, our politicians. The Attorney General has way too much power, but you've got all of these other systems where there is no fallback plan. Kath went through all these appeals, and then there's nothing. And then you've got to then rely on the goodness of the legal people that you get to talk to. And a lot of that stuff just happened by chance. That is not good enough. We should have a criminal cases review commission. And I've heard so many people say they don't support the notion of that, but it's better than nothing, because otherwise it's people like myself and other advocates that have stood up and held space for Kath that we should never have to. And I cannot begin to tell you that it's thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours, not just for me, but the people at the closest of this case, and then rippling outwards. You know, you've got all the other people that have stood by us and supported us as well. Put a value on that. It's pretty mind-blowing, pretty mind-blowing.
The systemic failures, of course, is, Kathleen, something you also write about. And as Tracy said, without that advocacy, it would never have been overturned. The pardon wouldn't have happened, and rightfully call out the failings of the media. Completely think that's absolutely true. And then also in this case, the media also then helped amplify that as well. The point being, it wasn't actually the wheels of justice turning naturally that saw this conviction overturned and you being pardoned. Kathleen, there's been obviously talk recently about the New South Wales compensation being announced, but before that was announced and caused quite a lot of headlines, you wrote in the book, the state must own its failure. That kind of harm can't be undone, but it can be recognised. What sort of measures would you like to see in place? Obviously there's a conversation around compensation, but then formal apology, law reform, lifetime care. What happens when you get out?
I think for you and I, it's more about the reform sides of things. We both very strongly believe that, okay, this system's not working. If you can try someone like me and manage to get a conviction on totally circumstantial stuff and highly exaggerated evidence along the way, and then you keep that person with appeals and judges and conformed thinking all the way along that didn't seem to want to budge in any way, it was very stubborn, then that system's not working. It should, we both look at each other and just sort of go, it should not have taken 20 years and it should not have taken Tracy, me and a whole team of beautiful people who volunteered all of their time, their expertise and everything else to make that change happen. It shouldn't have been on our shoulders to do that. It should have been the system. I should have been able to have, there's been accusations of me wasting taxpayers' money because of the amounts of tries I had going for an appeal. I used to sit there and go, put yourself in my shoes in prison, would you not be appealing? I used to go, if it's there to use, it's what I'm supposed to be doing. It's how you fight the system. Why would I not do it? But yes, we got to the point where those appeals and everything had been used up. And so there was a period there as I was thinking, I am stuck. I have to be in prison. So then I used to say to you, I had to split my focus. One had to be with Tracy and the fight to try to get me out. The other had to be, I'm stuck inside now. How do I get out in 2028, whether they like it or not? And I'm supposed to. I said, so I used to have to try to split my focus. That became difficult at times. And often, at times I almost felt like giving up and just focusing on the getting out in 2028 because it was all becoming too hard. So the reform sides of things is important to both of us. As I said, we don't want this to happen. I certainly don't want this to happen to any parent, male, female, or otherwise.
It still is.
And unfortunately it still is. Like I've said in the interviews recently, no lessons seem to have been learnt from Mindy Chamberlain. That was 33 something odd years ago. Now you've got mine. No lessons seem to be getting learnt from that either, in how attitudes are at the moment. So I'm a little scared and worried that it's going to turn around and happen again, and and then people are stuck in the same situation. The advocacy sides of things, we'd love to think, Tracy's often thought she could do, a how to advocate for someone in prison, because all the things she's been through and the experiences that she's had, it might help people to go, oh gosh, I remember Miss Chapman. She actually did all of that hard work. Let's look up and see how she did that, and help people be able to navigate it far easier than what poor Tracy did, because you could say she was a pioneer basically in doing it, because it's, all the things. that she had to do, including becoming experts in things that she didn't need to, or she would never have had to become experts in, So it's the reform sides of it's where we think things need to happen.
I mean, can I just add there too? I find that the justice system ridiculously stupid. I mean, I must say, because, and I know I'm going to upset a lot of people saying that, but I'll just quantify that by saying, Kath's trial was lost on certain circumstantial evidence. The conviction stands because this is what they say she's guilty of. You go through a process in appeals arguing, it's almost like circular arguments around those areas, but that wasn't done properly in the first place. And yet you can never go there because you're arguing what put her there, but you can't go to new and compelling evidence. So you are wasting taxpayers' money in a way, if you think about it, because you're just going over old ground that you will never win. Do you know what I mean?
I do. You're circulating flawed evidence, and the new conversations and the new information that ultimately led to the conviction being overturned were not being brought up.
That's right, because you can't. This is the system. It's actually quite ridiculous, and that's why you need mechanisms that are much more robust, that are much more open, and the only mechanism that we've seen is the CCRC. But to me, that's important because you have to have new and compelling evidence to throw things out. And the test is really tough. And then you've got to put these people that are often giving their time pro bono, not just the personal advocates that keep Kath going or whomever, but you've got legal advocates that then get paid a pittance if the thing gets legs. Prior to that, they're doing immense amounts of work for free. This is not an okay system, not marginally humane. And then, you could all argue that we could do things way better at the beginning and this wouldn't have happened anyway. And I will argue that till the cows come home because that is the truth of it. If we had a trauma-informed, neurodiverse affirming kind of system that did things properly at the beginning, that was robust and that had mechanisms like whether it's genetic testing and a whole bunch of other things in place, then this might not happen in the first place.
And when you talk about how could it have possibly happened all those years after what happened to Lindy Chamberlain, we hope that if there has been any incremental change, it is surely at that beginning of proceedings and more trauma-informed.
For me, it was more basic. It was more, okay, look how you went after Lindy Chamberlain. Why are you repeating that? I just didn't understand. Lindy and Chamberlain, my cases are so different. I said, but we do have the link and familiarity with how we were treated as such. And the whole lens-focused targeting was what Lindy and I both share in common. Unfortunately, the media, her case in the 33 years was still doing the same thing and tending to go just with, a nasty narrative rather than anything else. So in that respect, Lindy and I are, a parallel. But, I've spoken to Lindy a couple of times and both her and I, pretty much have always said, you're never going to change people's opinions and there's always going to be mud sticks on some and other people changing. People flipping their opinions was also a thing we had to get used to. 1 minute I'm guilty because the court said so. And then by the time the second inquiry comes around, I'm deemed not guilty and those same people flip then and go, oh, well, So we also had the, as far as I'm concerned, the stigma of Meadows Law. That was supposed to have been abolished before my trial even started, yet it was there. And then we found every judge, didn't we? All 17 of them that I fronted, had a similar attitude. And that's where the loop started and we couldn't seem to get past it. So that was where
the system as it is.
The system as it is.
Some ethics training wouldn't go astray. I know the units in your undergrad people, so don't come at me and say that I don't know that. But I don't think we do it well enough. I keep saying we need more humane-centred leadership and some good integrity, ethics. These people are paid lots of money to put forward really good arguments, but they're a bit dodgy. But, unfortunately, they convict people and the ramifications of what we see.
What we see. As I say, the book starts in June 2023, so I might just go back there for the final stage of our conversation. So, Kathleen, you're released from prison 2023. It's touched upon social media a couple of times, but just those changes in a culture from 20 years. What were some of the things that struck you the most, apart from, Presley, how like tall he'd become, and then all of the things that you rediscovered? What really struck out from that sort of, time machine component 2 decades
pretty much
ago?
Was like a time machine, because when I went in, I had a mobile phone, but it was an Ericsson or a Nokia was what was around back in the day, and I even used to sell those and have to program them myself to give to people to use. So to come out to a world, come out to like I had even bypassed the old flip phone area, sort of thing. And now they come out with, what we've got now.
They're back now,
and they're back now, which makes me laugh. I said, so technology advanced so much that, but at the same time I can do technology and sort of go, why are we even using this? I said it was just mind-boggling. Like, to me, to have a car that parks itself, I find funny. To have a fridge that talks to you, I find hilarious.
Watching you on a laptop for the first time was hilarious. And then
one finger
and passwords, they were driving her crazy.
They still drive me crazy.
That was hilarious. She would lose it over passwords. It was.
I joke in there that I wrote that book starting out with one finger and then I ended up with about 3. So I actually got a little bit better by the time
there you go.
I also sort of fashion. I laugh because I sort of go, 20 years I was inside and now all my old fashion seems to be back. I really, really like that. Tracy's fashion's always just been around, so she's never changed. I said, so, just stuff like that. Simple things like getting a driving license. I really wanted to get my license back. That was a great moment.
That was a really emotional moment.
Yeah. And, just humorous things like me trying to reverse park in the paddock between logs.
She says,
because I hated reverse parking and I still do.
She said, suck it up, princess. You've got to learn. So my partner laid out big trees and that had been, had fallen in storms and he laid them out. And I actually have some footage of her just down there you were well over
it. For hours.
You were.
Trying to get
and she would just,
right.
between logs. It was hilarious.
How did you go on the driving test?
Well, what I found interesting was that when you do a reverse park and you're doing a driving test these days, they don't actually make it between 2 cars anymore, because I think there might have been too much evidence.
A few accidents along the way.
But they do make you do one. And just things like I did my driving test and the knowledge side of it, and I was just sort of like, right, okay, well, that hasn't changed too much. But then when I go and do the driving around, and, I've often say to people, where have all these roundabouts come from? Like I went in and there was only like 1 or 2, and now there's a roundabout every time you turn around a street, that's, sort of thing. So food. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You were very excited about
I
something.
did. As you can tell, 20 kilos later, I'm still excited about food. I said so, but at the same time, trying to get me to stretch outside my comfort zone when it comes to eating food is a big thing. I'm very aesthetic. If it doesn't look right on a plate, I won't eat it. And if it's green, I won't touch it at all. I said, so there's been some humorous
But even
dinners.
like just being allowed to have more, like, because the amount of times when I read letters with Kath that cold chips or, the crap food that you get dished up, like to duck and whatever and for Christmas, and like some of the descriptions, that could fill a book just in itself. But so coming out and being allowed to, because, you give Kath money and she'd earn money for buy-ups and stuff, but once the quantity's gone, it's gone.
It's gone till you do it again the next week. Mind you, I did learn lots of different ways to have 2-minute noodles. Yeah, because when you're inside, they're a staple.
You became very creative with that.
Creative with 2
We
noodles.
talked about that once, actually. That's a bit off topic, sorry, but we did. We talked about the fact that there should be a recipe book for in prison stuff, because she would tell me the most amazing things, and I'd go, I hadn't thought you could do that with that. But she'd tell me like what people were making with the most obscure things. And yeah, we did, didn't we? We joke about a recipe book for prison.
For prisons.
Well, I'm seeing a couple of books in your respective future. Kathleen could do one, a recipe book about cuisine behind bars, and Tracy, that advocacy handbook that Kathleen suggested. So get that. There is also, of course, I guess that question about making up for lost time, from the little things, the technology, food, getting a driver's license, pop culture, catching up on TV shows. What's all this streaming stuff that's going on? I'm used to like the free to air.
I have turned into the worst binge TV watcher that you'll ever find, because if I come across a series, it's like I have to watch it from the beginning to the end, because when I went in, it was movies. So you sat through a beginning to end. So now to have these things that have like 6 episodes, and yet there's supposed to be 6 more, it's very frustrating to me. So I tend not to watch those that haven't got them all up muttered. So yeah,
endless.
It's endless. Yep.
There's also a more poignant aspect where, because you have been, I'm not sure if you still are, on the child protection list, you write in the book about avoiding children in shopping centres, and the anxiety it causes. You say, I'd get sweaty and jumpy and nervous and think ridiculous things. Would I get blamed if a child who smiled at me died at home in the weeks afterwards and parents recognise me? Later on that same page in the book, you say, I'm a childless mother. That's a pain that will never be extinguished. I walk on a knife's edge thinking about it. That side of things, have you been able to hug a child? You've spoken a bit about
even now. No. Even now, I have not had a child in my arms that's under. I haven't had a child in my arms, because everybody I know, all the children have grown. They're fully grown adults now. So I haven't had any friends. Friends are all my age now, so they're no longer having children. So it may not be until the children are having children that I get to do that. It's been described that when I'm walking down the street, our friend Bob has noticed it. If a little child's running around, I tend to watch or I tend to look, and I usually engage. They will look at me and I'll smile, and next minute I'm having a chat with a 3-year-old. That sort of thing. Or I'll smile at parents who are, with newborn babies and all that sort of stuff. So that's the knife edge bit where I want to, but I still have that reluctance. I said, and that's not. I'd say that's institutionalization more than anything else that needs to be handled. She's making me, because I'm jiggling and she's making me stop my leg.
Sorry, these are the things that you do when you notice that she's stressed, and I'm mindful of recording, so I'm sorry.
So as yet, not yet. I guess I still have that lack of being able to emotionally let go. I said, so I always have that insecurity that if I do hold a baby in my arms one day, what am I going to do? I'd hate to think the poor person gives me their child for a hug and says, can you hold this child? And I start off going and going and end up just a blubbering mess. The poor mother would be like, oh my God. I said, so It's to me, children are, and always have been and always will be, children are special. And children, and even the other day, I looked at a little girl who's just prancing around, or she's doing the 12, she's running around being a nut, she's just sort of like, and I looked at her and going, oh God, I wish I was 3 again. Well, you just don't care, and you just go about your business. And no one cares because you're 3. I said, so, I'll always cherish children. Children are special as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah.
What about love, romance, relationships? Is that a priority? We spoke earlier about how your marriage to Craig ended and then you're behind bars for 20 years. Now, I don't know whether you were able to have any sort of romantic connections while you were in prison or formed any relationships with anyone inside or outside. But in the 2 years since, has that been something that you're interested in?
I haven't been interested, and I used to always say, if it happens, it has to fall on my lap and right in front of my face. Otherwise, I'm just not going to be paying attention because I've had too much to do. Do I have an interest? I have an interest at the moment. How that will go, it remains to be seen. I said, because it's all a big learning curve for both. I said, so it is someone that Tracy approves of this time, though. And she isn't going to turn around and say, what the are you with him for? I said, so I might have a bit of luck with this one. You never know. So,
That's hilarious.
What do you think, Tracy? Are there any matchmaking role in your future, do you think?
Oh, look, I didn't ever want there to be, but look, I just wanted to be happy. The thing is, how do you take back 20 years? And I think that's what I've learned. It's been a hard slog on the outside, but Kath lived it on the inside every single day as well, and then vilified and all the other things that went with it. It's such a complex thing. When you get a chance to live, and that's what Kath said, I just want to live my life and find joy in every day and all of the things. And we talked about that a lot in the time that she was with me for nearly 7 months. I just wanted to be happy. So if someone can make her happy, then yeah. And, I'll always make sure over that person is doing the right thing. But, go for it, I reckon.
My final question for you both, Tracy, I might start with you. We've spoken a lot about the last 20 years and, of course, the years preceding it. For yourself, for your family, for Kathleen, for the women of Australia, for the broken parts of our judicial system, what would your hope be for the next 20 years?
There's a lot of work to do, that we don't dilly-dally, that we start having conversations, because I think we are never going to have proper empathy as a society until we all sit down at a table and start having decent conversations about how we can have a truly trauma-informed, neurodiverse affirming, the whole shebang system from front, middle to end. That is my dream. I will not stop now, because I've had too many conversations with other people about the travesties they're going through and how much it costs them in terms of their lives and livelihoods and the stress of it all. I can't get those things out of my head. We are a more humane society. That we never should, any of us should stop learning and listening and conversing. It's really important that we all do that. And I, we were joking the other day about setting up a kindness club. I kind of like that idea, because I think the world is too quick to go to hate and anger, and I'd love to see it pivot the other way, and I'm there to help it. That'll be the last thing I do on this earth, I believe,
Kathleen, final question for you. You write in the book towards the end, on page 404, how you were wrongly known as, quote, being Australia's worst ever female serial killer. And that title followed you around wrongly. And now you has been overturned. You've been pardoned. This book has come out. How would you like to be remembered? What would your hope be for the future and your legacy?
I think that's why I wrote the book, because that book will be my legacy. Unfortunately for me, I don't have children, family, or anything that I can class as a legacy. So I think that's why was one of the pivotal reasons as to why I wrote the book. I don't want my legacy to be known as that woman who was the worst serial killer in Australia, then got exonerated, and look, here she is.
Not your story.
I want it to be more than that. I said, so that was the reason for the book. It's for me personally, I'm probably not quite as full on as Tracy is in regards to, that's your ADHD, yeah. But for me, my future is, if me writing that book and me speaking as I am now helps other women or helps anybody who's going through, loss of children or grief or sitting there in a dark room thinking how you're supposed to cope, survive or move forward. If they suddenly go, okay, well, Kathleen did, I must be able to, let's see if I can go about this and do it. I'm happy with that. If that's my lot in life, to be helping to pass a message on saying, you can, survival is a great instinct, go with it, because that's what got me through. And just never give up. My message is just don't give up. I said, even though we teetered on the edge sometimes of doing so, the core of both of us was we're not going to. We will never give up.
Not your story.
Yeah. And if it is not your story to, as she says, if it's not your story to be a victim in such a process, then don't be one. People often keep saying to me, but you're a victim. And I'm like, okay, I was at the time, but now I stand here and I just sort of say, no, I'm refusing to be that, because that's not who I am. Was there suffering? Was there disappointment? Was there despair? Was there heartache? Was there emotional turmoil, trauma, you name it? Was it scarring and soul destroying? Yes, it was. Was there moments where I just wanted to give up and not bother? Yes, there was. But my core's always been, I'm not giving up on this. If you're innocent of something that you've been accused of, then don't ever give up on that. Because the day you do is the day that system wins, and you may as well just roll over. I said, so the book for me was my legacy and my way of saying to people all those messages.
And that book, That Legacy, Inside Out, An Incredible Friendship and Fight for Justice by Tracy and Kathleen, is available now, and you can purchase a copy via the link in our show notes. Kathleen, Tracy, thank you so much for your time today, and all the best with the book.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.